Welcome to Living University, where all the world is our campus.
How do we get our children to see beyond the here and now and make good decisions that will affect their lives in a positive way? What is the secret to a successful life without too many unnecessary wrong turns and pitfalls? Today we're going to discuss critical thinking, which is a huge building block to that type of life. Instead of jumping right into hows of critical thinking, let's first explore the what and the why. We'll start with the what. What is critical thinking? It's a kind of abstract concept on the surface. It sounds very mysterious and vague. It really is simple to explain, though, when we break it down to what the term really means. My husband often calls it asking the follow-up questions, which is one way to summarize what critical thinking is. Critical thinking is questioning things beyond the surface and making connections to the information presented with information in other areas. The author of your text summarizes it by calling it thinking about our thinking, by reflecting, analyzing, reasoning, planning, and evaluating. Thinking is just a surface action, but critical thinking goes beyond the surface and analyzes, reflects, and evaluates the thinking itself. It also employs the understanding of cause and effect. Cause and effect are often at the root of critical thinking. A simple example of thinking versus critical thinking is someone who notices the house is cold. The thinker would notice the cold and probably go to the thermostat and turn it a little warmer. The critical thinker would notice the cold and wonder why it was colder than normal, and then would set out to check possible reasons, such as a drafty window or a door left cracked open. The critical thinker is looking for the cause of the problem, so that it can be changed and fix things for the long term, where the thinker is just looking at the surface problem and the most obvious direct fix. When the thinker gets the heating bill that month, he'll probably wish he was more of a critical thinker. Critical thinkers are not just problem solvers, they are effective problem solvers. So now that we have a basis of what critical thinking is, let's move on to the why. Why is this an essential skill to teach our children? When you look around at the world that they'll be growing up in, we can see an abundance of reasons. No doubt, this world is wired to not be godly. Everything that surrounds us is contrary to Christian beliefs. That's one big reason our children need to be able to think critically. We can use the example of evolution. Years ago, one school system simply put a statement at the front of their science textbooks stating that evolution was a theory, not a fact, and that critical thinking should be used when learning about the subject. The school system was eventually made to remove that statement. Scientists and educators that believe in evolution do not want people using critical thinking, because when you do, the theory falls apart. We want our children to be able to analyze arguments, which are often cleverly made, and give only select facts about evolution, and be able to think critically about it, and know what questions to ask, and what presented facts to look farther into. As an aside, two books that were recommended to me for my children when we were exploring this topic that helped my children think critically in this area are Darwin's Black Box and A Case for a Creator. Darwin's Black Box is much more in-depth and it needs more parent guidance, but A Case for a Creator actually comes with a video and a discussion book along with a main book for group discussions on the topic. It's much lighter reading. Beyond evolution, though, there are many more day-to-day things that will come up and confront our children in this world that will challenge their Christian values and beliefs. Things that seem normal in society, such as homosexuality, living together before marriage, tattoos, and disrespectful attitudes, can seem normal to our children as well if they're exposed to these concepts and they never think critically about them. People often say Christianity is a mindless belief, that Christians do not think, they just merely believe everything. What we know to be true, though, is actually the opposite. To hold on to a Christian way of life takes much critical thinking in this world. For this reason, we want to make sure our children have the skill. Beyond walking a Christian way of life, a critical thinking will actually make things much easier for our children as they get older and they have to make decisions of their own. Of course, we want our children to make good decisions about what kind of schools they want to go to, what career to pursue, financial decisions, what kind of person to marry, etc. If they can think critically, they're more likely to make good decisions in all of these areas and have a more beneficial life without lots of hard lessons to learn from. I like the way Ellen Galinsky explained the need for the skill on page 209. She said, when you think about all the should I believe this or not, and is this the best solution, decisions that you have to make every day, you can understand why critical thinking skills will be essential to our children in school, at work, and in life. We want our children to be successful in all aspects of their lives, and this skill is an important one to help get them there. Unfortunately, this is not a skill that comes naturally to most personality types. The Promethean temperament, or the conceptual global learner that we've talked about before, may inherently have the skill because of their thirst for knowing how things work and why they work. This type of learner naturally looks beyond the surface. For most other types, though, it's not as natural, and a skill that will have to be consciously taught. Now that we know what critical thinking is and why is it important to teach our children, the next logical question is, how do I do it? How can we teach our children to think critically? Those of you with children this age range are probably thinking, you would be happy if you could just get your child to think, period, right? When we say this, what we often mean is we wish the child would think critically and more in-depthly about something. The hardest part of this concept is understanding we cannot think for our children. It is something that they have to do on their own. But they're more likely to venture out farther and think of things in different ways with encouragement and guidance from us. As parents and other caregivers, the best thing that we can do is provide opportunities for growth in this area and the encouragement to try it. So how do we provide these opportunities for learning and thinking critically? Here are a few. As I already mentioned, cause and effect is closely related to critical thinking. Our children need hands-on experience with cause and effect to understand the concept behind critical thinking. We're surrounded by cause and effect all day long in various situations and environments. The trick with this, as with most other opportunities, is just to recognize it as such. If we're aware that cause and effect allows us to foster the skill, we'll be more likely to see it when we encounter it and make a point of making sure our child gets the connection. It's just like in having a focus or setting a goal. Once you've made a conscious decision that what your focus or goal is, you're more likely to see opportunities around you that could help you facilitate that goal. The same thing is true here. If you're aware that knowing cause and effect is important to learning critical thinking, you will see more opportunities in the normal things that you already do, and you'll seize those opportunities instead of letting them drift by without calling your child's attention to it. As parents, we often want to hinder some of the effects that our children would naturally encounter by doing things to fix situations for them. Of course, if it comes to their safety, like if they're sitting too close to the edge of something, we need to intervene. But if it's not an issue of safety or a long-term consequence that will cause major harm, we need to let them experience the effective things they do, even if that effect is going to be unpleasant. When we intervene, we stop that natural process of cause and effect, and the child is not going to see that lesson and has no catalyst to think more thoroughly next time. No doubt, this is always easier to see in other people. I can think of many examples where my parents stepped in and fixed things for my brother when we were teens so that he would not have to suffer the consequence of his actions. I remember thinking then, and I still remember it now, that they were not doing a positive thing for him. They were allowing him to continue some habits that could have had bad consequences later in life, because they didn't want him to incur the consequences that went along with what he did. Because of that, he didn't get the cause and effect relationship until much later, when it was almost too late for him. My parents thought they were doing the right thing for him and saving him from heartache, but in the long term they just delayed a lesson that he would eventually have to learn. Like I said, I remember seeing that when I was a teen and understanding it wasn't a good way to handle a situation. But now when it comes to my own children, it's much harder to see. I know I have intervened for them before by helping meet a deadline at the last minute because they were not prepared for rushing out to get something needed for a project because they neglected to tell me about it early enough. I often think about it afterwards, that I'm doing the same thing with them that my parents did with my brother. If children do not have an opportunity to experience firsthand cause and effect, they will not understand it. Unfortunately, the negative effects are often the most memorable, but this does not need to be the case. There are times when children can see the positive effects of actions as well. We may not be as quick to point out these to our children, but we really should. Things as small as when a child has actually worked ahead on a chore or assignment, and then an opportunity comes up that they can go do something fun that they would have missed if their work was not done, helps drive home the point. The child can reflect and see that by using his time wisely, he was able to take advantage of an opportunity that he would have missed if he had left that chore and assignment to the last minute. This leads to broader skills of thinking ahead, planning, and anticipating, which are part of critical thinking. Another way we can provide opportunities for the skill to grow is to allow children to try out different solutions. Have you ever watched a child do something and think, well, that's not the way I would have done it, but hey, it works? Children at certain ages seem to naturally think outside the box. They don't have enough experience to know that there's a certain way something is typically done. Along the way, we as adults can squash that creativity by showing them a more conventional way of doing something. We have to be careful of this because children need those opportunities to try their own solutions so they can actively think about what works, what doesn't, and why. For instance, if a child is trying to connect two Lego blocks or put a piece of a puzzle in its place, at some point he'll probably get frustrated because he cannot get it to fit in a certain way. Instead of taking the piece and showing him how it fits with the others, if we want to help our child think critically, we should sit back, sit on our hands if we have to, and just talk to the child about what he's trying to do. We can offer guidance and suggestions through asking the child questions, saying things like, that doesn't seem to want to fit there. What do you think is stopping it? Is there something in the way? If you look at the shape of the two things you're putting together, do the shapes look like they match? If that one does not fit there, what do you think the piece would look like that does go there? By having a dialogue with him, you're modeling and helping him develop an internal dialogue that he can use next time he has a similar problem. These types of opportunities naturally come up throughout the day, but as I said earlier, you may not recognize them unless you're aware and you're looking for them. Besides taking advantage of those teachable moments that occur throughout the day, you can plan times to work on this as well. One game children seem to love to play is what could you do with? And then you fill that in with a blank of some kind of object. For example, what could you do with a bucket? You may show the child a picture of a bucket and then let them think of things that they could do with it. It could be a hat. It could carry her favorite marbles. It could be the stand for a seesaw. It could be a miniature stage for her toys. It could be a cave or a hiding place. Together you might pick a few things off that list for your child to try out and see if it would actually work, and then have a conversation about why it did or did not do what the child thought it would. This can very easily be incorporated into story time. If you're reading a book together, there might be an object in the story that the character uses one way. You can pick up the object from there and explore other possible uses. This game takes advantage of the imagination of young children and uses that natural ability to explore how things can work and reasons they might not work. These are just a few examples of ways to allow children to explore various solutions to a problem. There are lots of other ways. The important thing is to just be mindful in providing opportunities for children to try out solutions to a problem, and then give them space and encouragement while they explore. I've already alluded to the next way we can help our children be critical thinkers, and that is have discussions. Discussions are a very natural part of a day with a child in this age range. Though their vocabularies have grown quite a lot, they may still not have the tools they need to have real conversations about topics that allow them to express themselves and to talk with someone in a way that they can build their experiences and be a critical thinker. We can help with that by giving them tools to use in their discussions. Tools such as phrases that we might take for granted, but they're not familiar with yet, like, I agree or disagree with this because. I can connect with what you said because. Can you explain what you mean by that? On the screen here, you can see a chart with some other suggestions for phrases you can use with your children, and in turn, they will start using them with you in your discussions. Focus on the phrases given under numbers 5 and 6 on this chart. The website information is also on the screen if you want to get a copy of it there. The idea of purposely using some of these phrases is that it gives them some more phrases to fall back on, so they don't just constantly ask, why? As parents, we do not mind lots of whys, because we understand that the child is exploring and trying to figure things out. But as they get older, if they continue to use just the phrase why, it can put people on the defensive because they assume that they're being challenged, which is not the point of discussing a topic and thinking it through critically. Also, the question why is limiting when the child is exploring how and why something works or does not work. We can practice these phrases with them when we are visiting new places, such as zoos, aquariums, and museums. These places are often full of opportunities for children to think critically. Just looking through the dinosaur bones in a museum exhibit itself can provide many opportunities. If you don't have any of those types of places near you, you can always use your library resources, such as videos and books about topics that interest your child as a way to spark discussions where you can help. Along the same idea of having discussions is another way we can aid our children in thinking critically, and that is by modeling our thinking process, by thinking out loud. There's a rule in teaching that reminds us that as experts in a field, we often skip steps or certain skills that we're proficient in become automatic to us. We have to remember our children are not yet experts, so we may have to be conscious of breaking things down for them that seem natural to us. One way we can do this is in a natural way is to just think out loud when working on something. We can model critical thinking this way. For example, when you have a project to figure out, like you started a recipe and you realize you're missing an ingredient or two, you can talk out loud about what you're going to do about it. As you're pondering what ingredients you have that might work as a substitute, don't keep that internal conversation to yourself. Share it with your child. Or if you have a building project and you realize some of the pieces will not fit the way you imagined, brainstorm out loud what could be done to fix the problem. You might be surprised when your child chimes in as well and tries to give you help in figuring out the solution. The next way I'll mention that we can provide opportunities for critical thinking is just an echo of what's been said in many of the previous examples, and that is provide experiences. The more that children are exposed to things, the more questions that will pop up. Grocery stores, farms, beaches, mountains, historical sites, and any trip out of the area in which you live can all provide experiences that the child can use to build more knowledge of the world and how it works. As children get older, they're more capable of making connections between the experiences they've had, and they will gain a deeper understanding of the world. As they gain this understanding, there will be countless opportunities to reinforce critical thinking. Without varied experiences, children will not have much of a use for critical thinking, so it will go unnoticed and unused. So probably the simplest way we can help them think critically is just by getting them out of the familiar and broadening their view of the world and the things in it. And as a last suggestion, I'll just re-emphasize, give time for children to think. Don't jump in too early. I was reminded of this again today, actually, while I was working on my notes for this lecture. I had some leftover chunks of bread that I wanted to put outside for the birds, and I told my son to take care of doing that while he was outside today. I suggested that there were some garden twine in a box outside, and he could use that to hang the bread up in the tree that's in the front yard. While working at my desk, I have a window in front of me that looks out over the front yard from the second story. From my desk, I could see my son attempting to hang the bread in the tree. I stopped working for a few minutes and just watched him. He first attempted to hang it in a way similar to the way I suggested, and that was obviously not working for him. I then watched as he tried to slingshot it over some branches with the twine. That didn't work either. He finally stopped and he just looked at the tree for a moment. And then he took the bread chunks and just speared them with the ends of some of the branches. This was a much simpler and more practical method than I had thought of, and he was able to think through the process and use some trial and error and to work through the problem using critical thinking without any input from me. In this case, I was probably able to stay silent because I was upstairs and inside, which proved to be the right thing for him. When I asked him about it later, he said that if he hung it from the twine, it would just fall off, and it wasn't really accessible to the birds. He realized that they needed it closer to the tree branch so they could eat it while they perched. Now, if while I was talking about feeding birds bread, you were thinking, I'm not sure that bread's a really good food to feed them, I'll suggest that you check out the Happy Scientist website and his article about feeding bread to birds. It actually is a good example of critical thinking and thinking out loud. His article is basically his monologue as he explores the answer to that question. I won't tell you the answer, but I'll just let you think critically about that one yourself. So with that challenge, we'll conclude Lesson 15. We're almost finished with the semester. Thank you for all your work and the time that you have put into learning the subject. It is an important one, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to share some of my expertise in this area, and I've learned much from you as well through the discussions that you've participated in and the projects you've completed. By now, you should have access to the course evaluation that's provided by LU. If not, you should see it pop up on your homepage soon. Please take some time to fill that out and submit it. These are used to make decisions for these classes for future semesters. Thanks again for all your work. I look forward to reading your thoughts on the subject in the discussion forum.